makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London with the conversations that matter, and here's what's coming up on today's program. iPhone sales plunged 24% in China over the first 6 weeks of the year as Apple's troubles in the country deepen. China sets a growth target of around 5% that is described as ambitious as Premier Li acknowledges the challenges facing the world's second largest economy. Plus, the Supreme Court rules that Donald Trump can appear on the ballot in November. Ahead of Super Tuesday, we'll bring you the latest in the race for the White House. Also, a little bit later this hour, we speak to Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder and chief executive of Chobani, the best-selling yogurt brand in the U.S. He's spearheading a campaign along with 70 major firms, including Amazon, Bank of America, and Bloomberg, to connect, recruit, and train refugees in the workforce. Now, let's take a look at the European market map. A lot of the focus, of course, here in Europe is also what we'll hear from the testimony of Jay Powell. The other thing we watch for is Raphael Bostic, who also on the website and in a speech yesterday let understand that it's in the third quarter that he's expecting cuts, then followed by a pause, and he's worried about the exuberance possibly in the business community. Now, stocks edging a little bit lower. China's new targets have many questions from many analysts in terms of how much stimulus and support they'll bring together. And of course, it's I guess the market is now shifting from China to Jay Powell a little bit later on, and then the jobs report also later in the week. So Apple's iPhone sales in China declined by 24% over the first 6 weeks of the year, pushing it to fourth quarter among smartphone vendors in the country. That's according to the latest data from Counterpoint Research. Now, the California tech giant lost the title of China's best-selling smartphone maker to Chinese company Vivo, who appears to have done a better job of targeting the budget segment of the market. You can see Apple down 1%. To discuss Apple in China, let's get straight to Bloomberg's Oliver Crook in just a moment. But first, let's go to Beijing, where China has set its annual growth target of 5%, matching last year's figure, raising expectations of more stimulus. Bloomberg's chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel, is following the story. So good morning to both of you. Stephen, how difficult will the target be to be achieved?
It will be difficult, and I'm saying that with good confidence because the Premier Li Qiang said the same thing. He said it's not easy for us to reach these targets. We need policy support from all fronts. So there it is. But he didn't really lay out any specifics on what kind of stimulus that would be coming down the pipe, because there are numerous headwinds, obviously, in the Chinese economy, be it property, which is ongoing, be it consumer confidence. And Oliver is going to talk about that and the drop off for Apple. Obviously, big ticket consumer items have been falling all across the board on the consumer front, whether it's cars, refrigerators, obviously houses, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But there's also fiscal debt issues at the local government level. There is ongoing entrenched deflation across the board. So for Li Qiang, the premier, to set the GDP target as the same target as previously a year ago is quite ambitious because of all those headwinds. And we all know that 2023 was not a pretty picture for the Chinese economy. They also set a target for 3% CPI. We're in deflation here. So they must be confident that they can reach that 5% growth target and 3% CPI. The big question, and why the markets kind of reacted with a huh and a shrug, is where's that stimulus going to come from?
Right. So, Stephen, my question is, how much stimulus are we actually expecting then?
Well, Xi Jinping, for one, has been steadfast in saying, and he said it 128 times in various speeches last year, he wants high-quality development. That essentially means they're going to sacrifice some GDP growth for more sustainable growth. But we don't know where that's going to come from, because he is also launching and been launched right in the middle of a de-risking and deleveraging campaign, in particular in property. We have not seen huge rescues of property developers. We have seen state support, though, and we saw it in the work report today in the tune of long-term, essentially central government issued bonds to the tune of 1 trillion yuan. That will help bridge the fiscal gap, because they also set the ratio from GDP to GDP, the budget deficit to GDP at just 3%. So that indicates they're not really willing to roll out large fiscal stimulus because they don't want to exacerbate those debt burdens at the local government level. So they're in a quandary, and they admit it fully that it's going to be a tough task. They need consumer confidence to come back. They need exports to rebound a little bit, but that's an external situation out of their control. But they don't want to exacerbate the debt problems.
Stephen, thank you so much. Our Stephen Engel, they're, of course, following this party conference very closely. Let's also talk Apple. iPhone sales in China declined by 24% over the first 6 weeks of the year, pushing it to the fourth among smartphone vendors in the country. That's according to the latest data from Counterpoint Research. Let's get straight to Ollie Crook. Ollie, is this an Apple story or a China story?
Yeah, well, invariably, it's going to be a bit of both, like so many companies on the planet. I mean, where I usually sit in Berlin, we talk about this with all the executives that sell massively into China, whether it's car makers or chips or all that sort of thing. Everyone's been talking about a rebound in the back half of the year for 2 years. It just has not come. And you see that weakness now. You see it in China, and you see it in the sales. I mean, down 24%, Francine, iPhone sales in just the first 6 weeks of the year is absolutely mammoth. This is the biggest smartphone market in the world. So there is yes, that question. And of course, Apple is selling a premium product. When you have a lot of competitors that have a much better price point, I mean, Apple has been eroding market share. They're down now to about 16% of the market share in China. They were at 19% last year, and they're losing more ground steadily. But overall, you know, the overall market for smartphones was down also 7%. So there is definite weakness that is coming across the market.
So why did rivals in China, what did they do differently that actually did better than Apple?
Well, one of the main issues is going to be exactly that question of the premium. There are cheaper phones, but they're also very good phones, and there's also a huge amount of effort and energy in China to really get that tech independence and to sort of raise up its own producers of phones. So, for example, you know, there's this question of patriotic buying, right? Huawei came out with this new phone that the state media was really touting, saying that this is really a great response to U.S. sort of tech and chip supremacy. And Huawei, in those 6 weeks, while everybody was down, their sales were up 64%, which is absolutely mammoth. And we should also say that this has sort of eclipsed the story. But for Apple, they have a problem in China. They've got a problem here in Brussels, too, with this huge fine that's coming down the pipeline. So these are all things to watch as Apple will face problems in China and more regulatory scrutiny here in Brussels.
Ollie, thank you so much. Oliver Crook there in Brussels. Now, later today, Oliver also speaks to the EU Commission's competition chief following that big news of Apple being fined. AMD is said to have hit a U.S. government roadblock, meanwhile, while attempting to sell an AI chip tailored for the Chinese market. It's part of Washington's crackdown on the export of advanced technologies to the country. Bloomberg has learned AMD had hoped to gain a green light from the Commerce Department to sell the AI processor to Chinese customers. Now, the chip is said to have a lower performance than what AMD sells outside of China and was designed to meet U.S. exports restrictions. Now, to talk about all of this, we're also joined by Arnab Das, Global Market Strategist at Invesco Asset Management. Arnab, thank you so much for joining us. A lot of the focus, of course, is on China, on how a lot of the big conglomerates, actually sell to China, but also what the China consumer is looking at. How do you view China going forward?
Look, I think they've had a very different experience of the pandemic than the rest of the world, particularly the West, right? Here in the West, we had big fiscal transfers. China had a much more responsible approach to fiscal policy. And so ordinary people had to bear the burden of the lockdown, right? So they didn't have the kind of income effect that we all got from fiscal transfers. They had to bear a fall in the equity market, a fall in the real estate market. We had the opposite here, right? So we had positive income effect, positive wealth effect. We made out like bandits, right, during the pandemic. They had the opposite. So I think a large part of what's going on at the moment is kind of macro, right, is that consumers, households are still repairing their balance sheets, nursing their wounds from the pandemic and from the real estate market.
What does that mean for policies? So will policymakers really step in? I mean, we've been waiting for some kind of extra stimulus. I mean, there's a fragile real estate market. There's, as you say, also they're suffering from geopolitics between the U.S. and China.
Right. And I think a lot of these things will continue. They're sort of structural, like the geopolitical rivalry. There's also the demographic transition that China is already going through has been exacerbated, right, by the pandemic. So, look, I think there is some stimulus, and they are doing, some measures to accelerate growth. But I think they're taking a kind of responsible approach in a way, right? They don't want to have another debt binge, another kind of fiscally pushed credit binge that drives the real estate market or drives infrastructure. right through the roof. I mean, so one of your colleagues was saying how Xi Jinping wants higher quality, more sustainable growth. Right? I think that's right.
Will they get 5%? What do they need to do to actually achieve 5%?
Well, I think that's going to have to come, if they're going to hit 5%, it's an ambitious target, it's aspirational. If they get close to it, it'll be because productivity is rising rather than because of demographics or big increases in capital that are associated with debt. Right? So I think the question that we have to ask ourselves is, where is that productivity boom going to come from? And I think, they have in mind AI, they have in mind EVs, they have in mind, high tech of various kinds, green technology, and that can help. The question is whether it's big enough to move the needle enough to substitute for real estate and infrastructure. And I would say, it'll probably come in somewhere south of 5.
Interesting. Arnab, thanks so much. Arnab Das stays with us, and we'll have plenty more, of course, on China, and we'll talk Fed as well. Much more to come. We have a full roundup of markets. This is Bloomberg. Well, Raphael Bostic, the Atlanta Fed president, says he expects the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates once in the third quarter before pausing. His comments also come ahead of a testimony from the Fed chair, Jay Powell, who's set to appear at Congress tomorrow. We're now joined by Noor Al-Ali from our Markets Live team, and we continue the conversation with Arnab Das, Global Market Strategy at Invesco Asset Management. So thank you both for either sticking around or coming on. Arnab, when you look at the Fed, I mean, there's been, last year, markets, frankly, were all over the place. We were expecting a soft landing, a no landing, and they were kind of like zigzagging. Do you feel more confident that we have a clearer path that was communicated in what kind of inflation we'll get and what that means for the Fed?
Look, I think we're pretty much done with the tightening process. I guess they've put the idea, some of the FOMC members, and Larry Summers, of course, put the idea of another hike back on the table. We think that's quite unlikely. We're probably done. The real question is, how fast is inflation going to come down in order to let the Fed start cutting rates in order to maintain the real rate where it is and not have this kind of passive tightening, right? So I would say I think we're looking at that in the second half of the year. Maybe it feels a bit like waiting for Godot, right? Because we've been talking about this for a long time. But, the flip side of that is that the growth resilience, right? The labor market is, as you know, right, very strong. The economy is strong. The consumer is strong. The economy overall is strong. There are pockets of weaknesses, and people talk about this kind of rolling recession. We're in the kind of camp that says, everybody tries to come up with a cliche, right? Ours is bumpy landing. Not a soft landing, not a hard landing, not even what Alan Blinder called a soft-ish landing, but one that, like you said, has a lot of volatility, a lot of zigzagging, because, the longer financial conditions remain easy and the longer the labor market remains tight, the higher for longer will prevail. And some stuff is going to start to come under pressure as that happens. Right?
And that, I mean, what do you see, Nora, as coming under pressure? I know there's a lot of chat about, productivity, which could also change under some policies. We have a big election. Bitcoin was one of the things that people point at. Certain Marco Kalanovic of JP Morgan is saying, look, this is a sign of frothiness in the market.
100%, right? And you've seen, those risky assets come off the highs, European futures into the morning, and as they've opened, and U.S. stock futures as well, Bitcoin as well, all have really kind of, I don't want to say, there's sort of a temporary pullback that you've seen. And dare I say, could it be, on the back of that somewhat disappointing or lukewarm reception that investors had out of China, but also, preparations for a potentially more hawkish than expected Powell later. And I think that's sort of feeding into that overall theme that perhaps, that risk asset rally is going to take a breather. Now, momentum is very much there. There aren't a lot of reasons that are stopping these stocks from rallying, even though we've had, as you said, waiting for Godot is a very good kind of way to describe the idea that there's not much that's going to pull stocks lower, because all the momentum points to the fact that, we're pretty much in the rally. We've had the Fed push back. Now, whether or not Powell kind of sets it up for a more hawkish setup could be quite interesting as well. And that's what we're seeing in the markets today.
What's the good news that's left in the economy, Arnab? And I guess this is the only question that markets should really ask themselves.
Well, I think you said it, productivity, right? I mean, we've had a resilient economy. We've had growth holding up, labor market holding up, inflation falling, right? So the residual clearly is that productivity is rising. Some people even talking about a productivity boom. That may be overstating it. But it does seem that there's something structural changing in the U.S. economy and maybe in the world as a whole, right? Partly as a result of the pandemic, partly as a result of the geopolitics, partly as a result of industrial policy. These are not things that are easy to get right? It's actually probably much easier to get them wrong if history is any guide. But I think the U.S. has done something here which is working, right? It may not be winning the election for Sleepy Joe, right? But it does seem to be working for the economy and for labor.
Arnab, do you worry that actually the economy overheats? And if there is a mismatch between, I guess, what President Biden has put in place, why are Americans not feeling it?
Well, I think there is a risk, but I think it's just a tail risk. I think the big picture here is that inflation is coming down, the labor market is tight, but wages are not taking off, right? So I think it's working generally very well. Why is it not working politically? Well, I think that's, sort of levels versus rates of change, right? We're all talking about how inflation is coming down, right? The rate of growth of prices is coming down. What people have been hit by is a big shock to real incomes and real wealth. Right? They're feeling the level as being much higher of prices and other kinds of pressures that ordinary people feel. And of course, for ordinary people in the U.S., the margins are not very big, right? So I think I can sort of understand where the average Joe is coming from, right?
Yeah, and I don't know how this feeds into the markets, but of course we look at kind of the repercussions across the board.
100%. And to your point about the U.S. consumer, that resilience of the U.S. consumer has been something that's awfully noted, especially into tax season. That's why a lot of people say, well, you see that risk sentiment really pouring into those, riskier assets than normal. That's what's been driving, the tech gains. Of course, there's also that momentum of it, right? AI and its impact on the consumer and job habits and patterns have really changed the dynamics of the consumer today. And I think, we've had a lot of pessimism coming out of 2023 now, and there's so much of it that's been misplaced that I think the rally can continue into stocks. I'm the resident pessimist in my team, and I'm always the one that's looking for the contrarian view. But it's really hard for me to look at the data out there today and say, oh, that's going to be the thing that's going to drive us out there. But unless you get a steady stream of data that really points to that pain that you're talking about, there's no point for markets to stop rallying. At least that's what traders see.
That's what traders see until they're wrong. Thank you both for joining us. Noor Al-Ali from our Market Live team and Arnab Das, a global market strategist at Invesco Asset Management. Coming up, the most important day so far in the race for the White House has arrived. Yes, we're talking Super Tuesday. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court says Donald Trump can appear on presidential ballots this November. The unanimous decision overturned a Colorado Supreme Court ruling barring him from running again due to his efforts to overturn his 2020 election loss. Now, it comes as Colorado and 14 other states hold primaries today on Super Tuesday, the biggest day so far in the 2024 race for the White House. Now, let's bring in Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta. Kriti, good morning. So was the Supreme Court decision a shock?
Good morning, Fran. It wasn't a shock in terms of the actual result. There's an expectation. There's so much momentum here for President Trump. It would have been a real shock if he hadn't been allowed to run. The shock comes in the fact that this was a unanimous decision at the end of the day. Both liberal and conservative justices both ultimately agreeing that this actually doesn't hold in court, but for different reasons, Fran. The liberals suggesting here that's actually a question of whether or not states even have the right to enforce the Constitution when at the end of the day it is a federal declaration, and that is a power that only Congress can do. Conservatives, on the other hand, saying that that's actually more of a story of whether or not Trump is actually criminally indicted at the end of the day. So again, two different takes on what it, but at the end, a unanimous ruling in that President Trump can actually run on the ballots. And if he does indeed need to be taken off the ballot, that's only something that Congress can enact.
Yeah, and Kriti, frankly, Donald Trump is expected to win big today. So what happens to his only challenger, Nikki Haley?
Well, that's going to be the question, right? Does she end up dropping out? Does she run as a third-party candidate? The issue with Nikki Haley is she has just so much donor backing, far more donor backing than President Trump has. And given the legal fees that have really amounted to him, he needs that donor backing. So it's not just about the 64-point margin of victory, by the way, that he has in the polls right now against Nikki Haley on a national basis. It's also about the fact that if Nikki Haley drops out after Super Tuesday, is he able to kind of scoop up some of the donors that she had? And does she actually endorse President Trump for the general election at a time when she's been very outspoken about really being the anti-Trump candidate, being the fiscal conservative candidate? On the other hand, you've got President Biden, for example, also trying to see if he has the backing of Democrats. Remember, in the Michigan primary, it was a great example of the fact that several people came out and said they were uncommitted simply as a protest of a foreign policy stance. Both could be longer-term trends in the general election, Fran.
Kriti, thanks so much. Kriti Gupta there with the very latest, of course, on the U.S. election. It's a big day, Super Tuesday. Stay with us for special coverage of Super Tuesday. That starts at 9 p.m. New York time, so it's middle of the night. I would still get up and watch it on Bloomberg TV. Coming up, we'll look at the launch of Tent UK, a partnership where leading companies commit to actively supporting refugees in their workforces. Now, iPhone sales plunged 24% in China over the first 6 weeks of this year as Apple's troubles in the country deepen. China sets a growth target of around 5% that it describes as ambitious, as Premier Li acknowledges the challenges facing the world's second-largest economy. Plus, the Supreme Court rules that Donald Trump can appear on the ballot in November. Ahead of Super Tuesday, we'll bring you the latest in the race for the White House. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, this week is also the launch of the Tent UK coalition, where leading companies commit to actively supporting refugees in their workforces. 70 firms are backing the initiative to connect, recruit, and train refugees, including Amazon, Bank of America, and us, Bloomberg. The Global Tent partnership is made up of more than 400 companies worldwide across different industries. Spearheading the campaign is Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder and chief executive of Chobani. Now, after moving to the United States, Hamdi launched Chobani in 2007, which became a billion-dollar brand and is today the best-selling yogurt in the U.S. Well, Hamdi Ulukaya joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us. This is an exciting day because it's also the launch of Tent UK. How did the initiative actually start? I mean, this is trying to give refugees a chance, but also economically to be financially independent. Have companies been forthcoming?
I have to say, when I launched it, it was in the back of Chobani's success, which I tried to dig in and find out what happened here. And in my journey, I realized that when we started Chobani from this old factory in upstate New York with few people, and as we grew and hired more, one of the most remarkable things that we've done after hiring everybody local is letting refugees who settle legally nearby towns to come and be part of Chobani. And the question was then, and same as what it is today, what are the obstacles for a refugee to be part of a job? It's just language, it's transportation, simple as it is, not having a driver license or cars, or not having the perfect right training for the job that is available, and the unknown. Who are these people, where they come from, what's going to happen? And I think job answers all of that stuff. And what happens the minute they get a job, that's the minute they stop being a refugee. And companies benefit from it, as Chobani did. And I credit most of the success of Chobani's as being diversified workforce, when everyone can come in and put their best to it.
But Hamdi, how important is it, for example, to do it? So I know you've had initiatives around the world. You started in the US, you had one in France, and now in the UK. I mean, the UK is a small, open economy with an extremely tight labor market.
Right.
How much of a difference could this make?
Well, here we are. This is the biggest launch that we had. We had Mexico, 50 of them. We had other countries. We are in 11 countries, 400, as you said, 400 multinational large companies. This is the biggest coalition that we launched to the date, which is 70 companies. Some of them are British iconic brands like BP and Pratt, and some of them are, international, Marriott and Bloomberg. We have data that 20% of the companies, 10 or more employee companies, are having a shortage of labor. Can't fill it. and some numbers is over 1 million. We have 500,000 refugees here in UK. Half of them are Ukrainian, some of them are from Hong Kong, some of them from other countries, legally settled, ready to work, and having a hard time to find the jobs. So what Tent does is connect them together and share experiences globally. And we connect with HR departments of the companies and work tirelessly through the years. And our office here in UK in the service of companies to make sure that it's a success.
Hamdi, why do you think chief executives want to do this? Is this because they want to do good, because it's the right thing to do, or is it really to fill a vacuum in the workforce?
I think we call this win, 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 and it never ends. It continues to win. I mean, it's good for the refugees. It is the minute they're back to their life. Second, companies benefit from this dramatically. Culture, productivity, innovation, commitment for long-term, massive effect. But what you see is you get rewarded by the population. We did a study. In UK, most of the population rewards companies who are hiring refugees. And young talent want to join the companies who are hiring refugees and being part of this humanitarian crisis. So we have this global humanitarian crisis, but yet companies are leaning forward. It's really creating an environment for everyone to join and be part of the solution. In the end, companies who are leaning forward and doing right for business, doing right for humanity and community are the ones who are going to be relevant in near future and long time.
We speak to a lot of chief executives that say, look, it's actually much harder to push a social agenda, to push a climate change agenda because of politics right now. Would you agree with that it's actually harder to be a chief executive that does good?
Yes, this is a big question, and I think no one questions this. Tomorrow's consumers are going to raise companies their pure purpose of to make money for their shareholders. That idea is an old idea, everybody knows it. Now, when you are for humanity and community and environment, these are not against the business or success of business. The only question is you have to look at it all dimension of the business to implement it truly, not just check the box, and you have to commit for a long time. And that is basically come down to the shareholders of these companies need to ask the CEOs to commit to these values for a long time. At Chobani, I would say we broke all the records. I'll all tie it back into commitment to humanity.
Do you worry? I mean, it's very difficult not to look at American television without talking about the U.S.-Mexico border, about I guess anger or even hate in certain cases, also in certain parts of Europe against immigrants. How does this end?
Well, the saddest part, and I'm a Kurd from Turkey, and I moved when I was 21 years old from Turkey to New York, and I didn't want to move, and I had to move. I had to leave, and I get a new life for myself, and I hope that I created some better world surrounding me. Migration is a reality. It's going to be here and be here for whether if it's not conflict, it's going to be famine. It's going to be environment, and it has been throughout the history, throughout the year. And every single study shows, and I'm talking about orderly migration, shows that the communities and companies and the cities and towns who welcome and create an environment for everyone to be part of, they get the benefit in the end. Innovation happens. I mean, look at this country. This country is in the backs of migrations, and it creates so much throughout the world, and is always leading. And that's a reality. Unfortunately, politics is politics. And you look at the reality in the U.S. right after the last election and after politics, all the cities and the states that they know that how the refugees and illegal immigration does in their community, they want them in their towns and villages because always something new comes out. And it's a reality. Politics is going to happen, but we have to do what's right for the long term for people and for communities.
Hamdi, I also want to talk to you a little bit about Chobani, because a lot of people look at you as really, the poster child of a clever businessman that's made it in not that many years. You've also recently done an acquisition. So now you have coffee.
I'm a coffee,
as an Italian, it really speaks to me. But how are you expecting that market to grow? And how do you expect the two to play, yogurt and coffee?
Yeah, I think in the U.S., and I had an attempt in the UK, people don't know, I was talking to my driver as we were coming here. I tried to enter in this market. I ended up making it in Australia. We are number one in Australia. And one day I might come. I love this country. Food is an exciting place. back to natural, back to good ingredients, especially post-pandemic, has been a reality. And, you know, ingredients, of course, accessibility, these are major, major things. So we built Chobani with very simple idea. Good food is filled with good ingredients and accessible price and available for all. And that idea worked. And now we're expanding. So we added oat milk, we added coffee creamers, which is, and designed in Italy, in Florence. My friends, they designed the packaging. And now we are adding coffee. I think the food and beverage is having the second spring, in my opinion.
But is it changing? I mean, we speak a lot, you know, also to Novo Nordisk because of Ozempic and some of these, you know, weight loss drugs.
Yeah.
What's the relationship going to be
I think post-pandemic, people understood that food is extremely important, how they consume what they consume. I think it's hard to break it through because these companies are major, big companies. They've been around for a long, long time. For a startup to stay independent and break through it and disrupt a category like coffee. I mean, you're talking about ready-to-drink coffee in the US, the major brand, has got 43 grams of sugar. That's 13 sugar cubes in a bottle of coffee. I mean, that's just wrong. Real innovation, good innovation. That's what people bring with La Colombe is coffee that people drink cold now. Just like in Italy, you know, you have your espresso, but there's this new trend. 75% of the people, they consume their coffee cold, even in the wintertime, even in New York. But can it be wholesome ingredients, very little sugar, not too much, and can be a daily habit because 90% of population, adult population, drinks coffee almost every day. This is benefits that more and more coming out.
So Hamdi, by giving something that's a little bit more, I guess, fitness conscious, you think you'll get through. This is the way the trend is going.
Exactly, and you know, we are all busy during the day, you know, we are busy moms, busy dads, busy workers, you know. What is fueling you naturally? I think it's food, it's well-being, and it's surrounded, you know, with friends and family. These are all important. But stuff like food, we can make it better. We proved that Chobani. It's simple, without preservatives, something that we can name and pronounce the ingredients. Even myself, who I learn English later, it's extremely important. And I think it comes down to one simple thing, is maybe coffee doesn't apply to that, but any food as a CEO we make, if we don't serve to our children, our family, we shouldn't be serving to anybody else.
That's a good benchmark. How big do you want to grow? And actually, I know there was talk about a possible IPO.
Yes.
Is this something that's still on the cards? Still
in the card. We have not made that decision. Company is in a very healthy place. We grow double-digit volume and dollar, gain shares. It's pretty amazing what's happening at Chobani. I contribute to all the people that passionately work at the place. We have no pressure. Our employees are 10% owner of company, and I want them to get an access to the wealth that we have generated. And that would be a reason I would do it. And second is to grow this company further. I personally do believe, I'm not big into, you know, making 3 to 6 billion, but as you grow, your impact grows, and you get to do more things, and it gives me a lot of smile. So we'll see. I mean, we have quite a bit of options. One of them would be that.
Hamdi, what do you attribute your success to?
People. I really, of course, America, upstate New York. Idaho. I mean, America is a magical place. But the people I work with every day, refugees, migrants, people come from all background and do the right thing. Everybody wants to do the right thing. And the business is a great environment for everyone to come and join and focus on the common goal. Make good food, build life around it, and make the world a better place. That's not work, it's just having fun.
I could talk to you for another hour, but we do have other news. Hamdi Ulukaya, they're the founder and chief executive of Chobani. Now, coming up, we talk geopolitics and Gaza ceasefire talks stall as Israel delays sending negotiators until Hamas answers queries. We'll have the latest on the war next, and this is Bloomberg. Well, hopes for a ceasefire in Gaza have been dampened as Israel delays sending a negotiator to Cairo for talks with Hamas. Now, Israel says it will not do so until Hamas provides a list of the Israeli hostages it intends to free in return for a pause in the fighting. Well, Bloomberg's EMEA news director, Rosalind Matheson, is here. So, Ros, where are we with the ceasefire talks?
Well, the ceasefire talks, as much as they are very much bogged down in Cairo. Israel has not, as you said, decided to send a delegation for now. There is a Hamas presence there. There are conversations going on, but it's very difficult to get any traction without Israel present. As you say, the major sticking point seems to be that Israel wants an update on the status of all its hostages inside Gaza, who they are, where they are, their health and so on, before it agrees to have the proper conversation around a ceasefire. Hamas says that's too difficult at this point in time, and so we can't even get to the point where we've got people properly around a table having that conversation. We knew the talks had been bogged down for days. The question is there any kind of way through in the next few days? Is there a path forward before we get into Ramadan, into the Islamic holy month, the holy period, when Israel has indicated it might be prepared to go forward with its offensive inside Gaza? The real impetus is to get this ceasefire done before we get into Ramadan itself.
Ros, the U.S. says the situation in Gaza is simply intolerable. Israel denies that people are starving. How is that possible?
Well, what we've seen is a lot of photographic evidence that people are in quite desperate states inside Gaza. Of course, when you've got a war on, you've got a lot of people moving around quickly. You've got, people fighting. You've got aerial bombardment. There's a lot of disruption, and that just means that people's daily lives are affected no matter what. Their ability to access food, water, medicine, shelter, and so on, regardless of anything else. Israel's point is they say there is actually a decent food supply, water supply and so on inside Gaza. They accuse Hamas of deliberately disrupting those supplies and not allowing people to be properly fed. International aid agencies, those who have some kind of look inside what's happening inside Gaza, say the situation is in fact very, very dire. Some aid is getting in, but it's not getting distributed well. Of course, we know they're now resorting to airdrops as well. It's very clear that there is a significant humanitarian problem going on inside Gaza, regardless of where the supplies are going at the moment.
Ros, more developments also in the Red Sea. What can you tell us about that?
Well, we know the Houthis say they've hit another ship in the Red Sea. Of course, they sank one, their first ship that sank recently after drifting for several weeks. So we know the Houthis are keeping up that campaign of targeting shipping in the Red Sea. It does seem to have tapered a bit, but it's enough that most ships are still opting to take the long way around. So they're achieving their goal, really, which is just to force shipping to make those major diversions. We also have reports that some undersea cables may have been damaged in the Red Sea. It's very unclear if that's due to Houthi action or perhaps a ship just dragging its anchor. But either way, again, how on earth you repair undersea cables at the moment in the Red Sea is a very difficult question. So again, further disruption for supply chains, possibly for the internet and so on, because of what's been happening in the Red Sea.
Ros, thank you so much. Ros Matheson, there, head of our newsroom here in EMEA. Now, coming up, evidence that investment is returning to the UK as chief executives tell us they're more optimistic than a year ago. We'll be looking at the bullish case for Britain. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Now, the UK's reputation as a global investment destination hit a low last April when Microsoft President Brad Smith said the European Union was a more attractive place to start a business. Yet, 10 months later, FTSE 100 chief executives tell us confidence is recovering. For all the talk of British decline, official figures actually suggest the UK remains the world's top investment destination after the US, trumping even China. Where our Bloomberg radio anchor, Caroline Hepker, has been talking to Britain's business elite over the past 2 months, and she joins us now. Caroline, there's been some great reporting. You've been speaking basically to anyone who's anyone. So what's changed? Is sensible Britain back?
Well, perhaps. Last year, if you remember, it was pretty dismal for the UK. I think we did hit rock bottom in terms of sentiment. It wasn't just Brad Smith. Lots of other businesses were very critical of the business landscape in the UK, from Dyson to AstraZeneca, Arm listed in the US, if you recall. By the end of the year, though, the data and sentiment did seem to shift. And so Philip Aldrich and I did another sort of deep dive. Berenberg, Deutsche Bank economists were looking at the silver linings for the UK economy and asking whether there's actually a more bullish case to be made for the UK. So the WPP Chief Executive, Mark Reed, saying that actually this year could be one of those years where we feel a little bit better as the year progresses. We also had a lot of positivity from other CEOs. For example, the CEO of British Land, the Legal and General Investment Management CEO, Michelle Scrimgeour, and also the Lloyd's of London CEO, John Neal. He was saying that actually the insurance business is looking really positive. He was looking to the US, where most of their growth is, saying that there is a big business, that what we do here in London is really unique in terms of insurance. He was a bit more worried about financial services overall, but even he was saying that he does feel much more positive now. Have a listen to what he said.
Yeah, we've seen a wealth of delisting on the FTSE. We've seen real challenges around investment and funding in the UK. We need to get that back on track. You know, part of the livelihood and well-being of UK PLC is as a global financial services centre.
So that was John Neal, the CEO of Lloyd's of London, speaking to me. He was saying that the backdrop is better. He was more positive because of the government's Mansion House reforms, the Windsor framework when it comes to the UK's relationship with the EU. He does also, I think this is quite important, want to see a two-term government. So there is very much a realisation at the heart of business in the UK that we need policy making for the long term and, as Michelle Scrimgeour said, something that transcends government in terms of policy making.
So I wonder whether when you speak to chief executives, whether they think, look, actually the UK is a good house in a bad neighbourhood because of everything that's going around the world, or whether they really think there's, you know, real progress.
Yeah, I think that's a big question, isn't it? I do think the positives are inflation is coming down. There could be an interest rate cut. Wages have been improving. For the past 6 months, we've seen wages gain. The Marks and Spencer's chairman, Archie Norman, who spoke to me last year when we did the reporting about Britain being adrift and uninvestable, came back to speak to us at the start of this year. And he was saying, look, people are genuinely better off. That's better for the M&S customer, but also that does signal that actually there may well be recovery. Business investment also went up last year, and longer term, there is more positivity about artificial intelligence. Maybe that could deliver big productivity gains for the UK. WPP CEO Mark Reed was saying they're already implementing it, and it's creating 20 to 25% greater productivity for some of their employees. Here's what he said about AI.
I think it's a massive opportunity for us. I mean, at one level you could say, well, the large language models, they're all being created in America. But actually, what you can do with AI is get access to these models extremely cheaply. Because we're a service-based economy, it could make our service structure much, much more productive, much, much more efficient. And I just think we have to lean into it and embrace it.
So that was the WPP CEO, Mark Reed. Look, there is a bit of a disconnect between business people and investors. We did an MLive Pulse survey on investors. Almost half of them think that the UK's living standards are going to go down in the next 5 years. Only 17% were positive. So there is still a bit of a disconnect, but some more optimism ahead of the budget.
Caroline, thanks so much. Caroline Hepker there from Bloomberg Radio. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, Danny Berger and Manus Krani in New York. We have a lot of news when it comes to Bitcoin, Super Tuesday, so US politics, and of course, the Fed in China. This is Bloomberg.